Hello, everybody. Welcome to another deWiz webinar series, the first in our brand new coaches series that we have here on the deWiz Facebook and YouTube channels. We thank everybody for taking some time out of their Wednesday afternoon to join us and talk about the science, the data, the physics behind the golf swing, and how you, as a teaching professional, as a coach, can use deWiz to optimize your practice sessions, get the most out of your students, and give your students some tangible goals to work on when they're not under your eye. And when they leave your studio, they leave your session, with deWiz, you can give them some goals to work towards as you send them off, and they can incorporate into their day-to-day routine. Today, we're going to be joined by Ben Pellicani. Ben's a good friend of ours. Him and Markus have known each other for a while now, and Ben was kind of the OG when it comes to coaches and learning about deWiz. He's been around and working with us since last fall, and we're going to bring Markus and Ben onto the screen right now. We're going to welcome them to the webinar. Markus and Ben, there they are. How we doing, guys? Let me switch you around. There we go. Ben, as always, thanks for taking the time out to join us. And I know you and Markus are really going to get into some stuff today when it comes to deWiz.
Well, thanks for having me.
And Markus, I kind of teed it up for you there, but talk about how you and Ben kind of first got introduced to each other, and how Ben stumbled across deWiz last fall.
Well, thank you, Matt. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm going to tell our viewers that we're going to hear some very interesting things about how Ben uses deWiz and his coaching. And you're going to get some tools for your own game from this. But a very interesting thing, because I was contacted by Ben, like you said, last summer or fall. And Ben was asking me, like, okay, I see you guys on the internet, and I was a bit skeptical if you could deliver the data we do. And he said, how good is your accuracy? And to that point, Ben's an engineering major, so he knows what he's talking about. And so I told Ben that I'll send you a unit and you tell me. And what happened?
Yeah, so like you said, I was a mechanical engineer major in college, and I've had kind of an interesting background to where I got to. I always joke that I was playing golf and had to take engineering classes on the side, so they let me play golf. But between that, I actually way back when had a short stint with TrackMan back in 2007, where I worked for them, and working for Mike Bender in the early part of my career. I think I intuitively get skeptical of all kind of technology, knowing probably just enough to be dangerous to ask the right questions, I think, and knowing that whatever technology you have, and this is kind of a universal statement, it's only as good as how it measures, and diving into what is it actually measuring, what kind of sensor are they using, what kind of, how fast are those iterations? And though the average person doesn't need to know that, when I give something to my student, I want to make sure not only is that data reliable, I need to make sure it's I'm painting the correct picture for it. And so I probably am the annoying guy who calls and says, I want to know all of this information. So when I give something to a student, they know if I believe it's accurate, then we can go from there. So I'm not sure if you're glad I called back in summertime a year ago, but I know I've been the beneficiary of that since. So.
Yeah, no, I'm very glad, because I happen to be the same guy, very skeptical. And I've been, during our development of deWiz, I've been really bugging the developers really hard to get everything pinpointed. We're talking about the reliability and the validity of all the numbers. So how would you say the most benefit of deWiz for the club golfer in your opinion?
Yeah, so if I looked at I stepped into this mostly through the wedge category. So being, I've kind of had my foot in a lot of parts of the teaching business. I'm currently at a member club here in Nashville. So on a given day, I could teach a 10 handicap, a beginner golfer, fortunate enough to teach a handful of guys who play golf for their careers, and then a handful of college kids. And I also used to be a college golf coach. And so I kind of come at this a lot of times in different angles. And so to me, what I got fired up about was the wedge idea. And this is kind of how I use it when it comes to wedges. So I believe that great wedge players use length of swing to dictate distance. And there are two ways to do it. You either use length of swing or you use same length of swing, varying tempos. And not that varying tempos don't play a small role in maybe a little nuance at the highest level of player. I would say most average players or players who aren't, maybe playing golf professionally, that length of swing, in my opinion, is the number one thing that should dictate how far their wedges go. And so whatever system people use, be it, I kind of use reference to the body part. So hip high, rib cage, shoulder. I've heard everything from first position, second position, third position, to guys, you just go, this is my 50, 60, and 70-yard swing. And so this probably stems all the way back to when I was a player. So when I was a player at Bucknell University, and I'm going to sound like one of these old guys that walked uphill in the snow barefoot both ways, but on Mondays, our golf course was closed, but we had a wedge range, which is a very loose term in this. It was a field next to the maintenance shed, and it had 3 flags. And we're pretty sure that these 3 flags were 50, 75, and 100 yards. I say that because this is before lasers. So, and I'm hitting probably X'd out top flights that I found in the woods. But so what I learned in my college career is, because I was lazy and I didn't want to go walk all over the place to shag my own balls, that I learned that if I went hip to hip with my most lofted wedge, which at the time was 58 degrees, all the balls would go to the 50-yard flag. And then I learned that shoulder to shoulder would always go to the 75-yard flag. And then if I went shoulder to shoulder with my 52 degree, they would all go to the 100 flag. And so when I learned this in college as a player, and I mean, every Monday for 4 years in my college career, I was out on that wedge range, hitting my wedges, getting quote unquote dialed, right? This is pre-TrackMan. So when I move on and got my butt whooped by a lot of guys who could play better than me, and I get into the teaching world, I took what I did successfully as a player to there. And then slowly but surely, things like deWiz is validating kind of what I knew as a player. And then when you start combining length of swing with the technology we have with launch monitors, I call it a cheat code. And so for me, with my belief of length of swing dictating distance in wedges, then knowing your length of swing should be like the most important factor of getting really, really good with your wedges, or at least the first step in that. And so that's kind of, what got me fired up. And what's interesting is people go, oh, that's just for, your junior players or your college players. I was fortunate enough, I caddied for one of my guys who got invited to play in the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, and he's a 10 handicap. And before every round, we went through his hip, rib cage, and shoulder swing. And I know I've joked with you before, but I do everything in centimeters. And my joke to that is because us Americans have no idea how big a centimeter is. So it becomes this kind of just unit of measure, right? It's kind of like a universal unit of measure. And because of that, I think we even started talking like that on the golf course. Like, oh, this is my 115 gap wedge, or this is my 90 centimeter, 56. And I think even for a 10 handicap, that gave confidence that they were going to get the yardage they want, reproduce what they were practicing out on the golf course. And obviously a 10 handicap's not going to hit it as solid every time, but because they knew the length of their golf swing, they were able to have confidence at least approaching the golf shot.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that I get the same thing, like, okay, dialing in the wedges is for the elite player, but actually it's not. And just using deWiz, and I see how fast a 20 handicap can learn to know what is a 100 centimeter backswing. And just knowing that, then at least you have one half swing to use. And like you said, dialing in from the perspective of the body with the hips and the rib cage and the shoulders, and just transferring that to a centimeter value that you can practice and get the feedback on.
Well,
so
and I want to go one step deeper, because if you are in a good elite player, one of the things that as a college coach, so this is kind of speaking to these high school college coaches, I'm still a high school coach, but I remember when I was a college coach, one of the hardest shots for me to teach my players was like the knockdown pitching wedge. Is that they all wanted to step up, whatever that number is, 100, call it 130 yards, right? All these kids hit it really far now. Yep. So let's say they had 130, 135, and a lot of them, that's a hard gap wedge. And they would hit, spin it back, hit, spin it back. And so your good players who are older would eventually learn how to hit a little chippy pitching wedge in there. Well, what I've been able to, I think, to help communicate with my better players is, you know what, say, a 115 backswing is. What's a 115 pitching wedge? Have them have that ding go off so they know that they're hitting the right length golf swing. Pair that with a launch monitor, be it a TrackMan, whatever. And now they have confidence in that little 3/4 chip pitching wedge. So what took me, I don't know, 4 years of professional golf to figure out, these guys are learning in 40 minutes with a level of confidence that they can go take it onto the golf course. So, you know, it's interesting. There's not a lot of technology out there that can greatly impact a 15-20 handicap, because they have very little awareness of their golf swing. And so the deWiz is helping them gain awareness of their golf swing, but also be super impactful for your elite players. And that's a rarity in the technology world, because like I said, I worked for TrackMan, but using a TrackMan with a 20 handicap is probably not valuable. I mean, there's a couple things you can glean from it, but you know, they kind of need something else. But there's very few things that you can use that can be impactful. Like I said, and I teach, you know, in a span of 3 hours, I could teach the spectrum of player. And I find myself, you know, when talking about wedges going, well, why are we trying to guess this? Or what I see as, hey, you made that swing a little long, that thing dings, or, you know, you get the and they go, oh man, I didn't know that one was longer. And so then they try to shorten it. In classic 20 handicap, they really shorten it. And then they go, oh man. So there's that learning curve. Again, what took me 4 years of sitting on the wedge range at Bucknell University, they learn in 40 minutes. And as a teacher, that's all I'm ever trying to do, is equip my players the ability to own what they do. And so, and again, to turn that around, to then have an elite player walk through your door and use the same technology, that's a rarity that I see in my business.
Yeah, that makes me really happy to hear. And that's why deWiz was created, to help golfers play better and enjoy this fantastical game more. And like you said, took you 4 years, now takes you 40 minutes. That's quite a statement. We talked a lot about the length of backswing, because we're talking a lot about the wedges here today. Are there any other data points that you like to use when it comes to the wedge game, like the hand speed or tempo?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit on just wedges in general, right? We know that great wedge players have the ability to control two things that impact how far a wedge goes: the launch angle or launch window that they put the wedge out at, and the club head speed, or in turn the ball speed, at, you know, however way you want to look at that. Most better players hit it solid, so they're kind of interchangeable values. So launch window and club head speed will ultimately dictate, or another way to think about this is, if I was trying to calibrate a cannon, that cannon would have an angle, and that cannon would have the amount of gunpowder. And so if I can, the less variables I can have, the quicker I can calibrate my cannon. And so the first variable we try to kind of calibrate is the launch angle. So most good players that have been measured launch a ball at about 30 degrees. And so the first thing we do is we teach them to launch ball at 30 degrees. So then the next piece is, okay, now we got to control clubhead speed. And there's two things that can control clubhead speed: your length of swing and your tempo. And so again, if we're trying to eliminate variables, if I have the ability to launch it out of the same window, and I have the ability to own the length of my backswing, be it 1, 2, or 3 golf swings, which, by the way, I never really advocate for more than 3 positions in the wedges. I'd be curious of what some other guys say, but 3 is kind of my number. I find that you can be really versatile with 3 lengths. So then if you sit there and you go, okay, the launch window is correct, the length of golf swing is correct, the last variable would be making sure the tempo is correct. And to me, the picture that paints that the best is looking at hand speed. And so when you look at hand speed, that's kind of that last layer in the equation of, okay, now that I got launch window, now that I got length of golf swing, okay, now, hey, why did that ball go 5 yards further? Oh, you swung it a mile per hour faster, or notice how we're not doing that. And then that could create part of the story of those other variables. Like, we found that one player, when their backswing time got a little high, that they had a tendency to chunk it when they went slow, and their sequencing got thrown off. I've seen other players where we look at the ratio number. And I know we've started to talk a little bit about downswing time and maybe how that plays a role into it. And so I think, again,
what ratio number are you looking for in the wedge game?
For what number?
The ratio number in the wedge game.
It's a little dependent on the player, I've found. Most of my guys are right around 2.1. I've had a couple of guys go a little bit further, but I'm not. Sometimes when they get a little slow to fast, I find that we're using the wrong things to control it. It more or less, the launch window doesn't get owned as well. I find that when the tempo is a little bit quicker, probably because I like it launched a little bit lower than maybe some other people, that with that lower launch, I find that ratio to be closer to 2 than, say, in the full swing where it's closer to 3.
Yeah, I see the same thing. And like if we go to the full swing, where the club golfer can go 4-1, very slow on the back, jerking it down, not timing the impact properly. And we go to the wedge game, like Annika Sörenstam, for instance, she is very much 2-1, very much 2-1 on her wedges.
Yeah, and what I like to do is I like to look at that from different lengths. So the first thing that I like to do when we use the watch for length of swing is I like the player to dictate the length to me. So I don't say one's right or one's wrong. We hit wedges until the player goes, that's the one I like. Great. If you think you can repeat that one, let's do that. And then the next step of that is, okay, let's have maybe 1 or 2 variables. And then with the elite players, we'll use the distance wedge kind of game. And then on top of that, we'll throw a full swing as part of the distance wedge game. So they're hitting wedge shot, and then they got to rip a driver. Wedge shot, rip. And that's when I think we're really cooking with gas, because that's really hard for a player to own when we start throwing in all those variables.
And that's a great tip for all you guys out there. This is about the interleaved practice, making variation in practice. Again, if you're practicing the wedges, you go 80 centimeters, 80, or 32 inches all the time. It gets easy. But the golf on the course is not like that. And learning is actually accelerated if you keep changing it. So in the deWiz app, we have the ability to randomize numbers completely, or between your wedge gears, you can shuffle. So you go from your like Ben's hip to hip, or rib cage to rib cage, and stuff like that, translating to, I think it's a 73, 83, 93 centimeters for you, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm on the 10 side, so 83, 93, 103. The other thing I would say is when you throw in the full swing, if you really want to go like next level, is every swing change which wedge you use, on top of every so often have that full swing number shuffle in, then you really start gaining a lot of awareness of, hey, I got to hit a 56, then I hit my 60, then I hit a 7-iron, then I'm hitting another 56, but maybe a hip-to-hip 56. And again, that, or whatever you call them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's when really, I think, get the most out of your practice. My terminology for that is randomized block practice.
Yeah.
Because really, you're just practicing 3 or 4 golf swings over and over and over again. But every time you swing, it is a different, it's a different scenario. And then I think one thing that maybe people are forgetting about is that you can do this inside. So
yes.
for all these cold weather guys, you're like, I can't practice my wedges inside, or why don't you just get really good at owning your length of swing? Now, if you're doing it inside, I'd be hyper aware of my hand speed number. And then I would go, when you get out, come springtime out on grass, you should be light years ahead with your touch and feel with wedges.
Yep. Yep. That's a great tip. Before Matt brings in the viewers' questions, I have one more for you, Ben, here. Do you have any little tips on how to use deWiz for our viewers here that they may not have thought about?
Yeah. So, and again, a lot of this is going to be what you believe in the golf swing. If we look at a different area than wedges, we've talked a lot about wedges. Mm-hmm. I believe in creating depth in our golf swing with our pivot. And so there's a drill we do called turn and touch the wall, where a player gets their backside barely on or just off the wall, and then they turn and try to get their hands as high on the wall as possible. And so it's been a drill that I've used to educate players on how to create depth with their pivot in their backswing. What's interesting is when you use the watch, this is one of the first things I tested on the full swing, is you don't need to make a real swing for it to register. So I did the wall drill and kind of half did a downswing, just kind of a nonchalant downswing. And I found that the, this is bad, I don't know what you guys call it. The angle number, what is that? What's the
backswing plane?
Backswing plane is almost every one of my players were like 76 to about 79 degrees when they did the wall drill. So if that's happening a lot, so when they go and do a full swing, we are able to equate your hand path to the depth we want by using the hand plane number. Or, I use a plane board. We'll get them on the plane board and educate, hey, this is what you did on the plane board. We deem that as what we desire in our golf swing. So if that's what we desire, what did those numbers read? From both the backswing plane and even the transition, because my transition number I think is a little different than the average guy. Mine's like a couple over because of how our hands track on that plane board. And so to me, that paints a clear picture. So that's probably, if you struggle with creating depth, and I believe depth is the number one way of being able to help a player shallow the club in transition, that if you struggle with that, that's a cool little thing that I found with the watch that I wasn't anticipating, that again, I thought was kind of a neat little benefit.
Interesting. Great. So pay attention to that backswing plane number. Matt, do we have any viewers' questions?
Yeah, I had one that came in from a guy, Jim, who had reached out. He wasn't able to watch today, but had sent in a question ahead of time, simply just looking for best practices from a coaching perspective of the fundamentals of just how you use it. So do you set up different profiles for each of your students on a day-to-day basis? How often are you working with deWiz with your students, and what kind of feedback do they take from those sessions that they can then use, when they're out working on their own afterwards?
So I would start with, it depends on what we're trying to get our player to own in what they do. Obviously, I'm using it literally almost any time I'm talking about wedges. And I don't care if I'm working with a 30 handicap or a tour player. I truly believe, I was having this conversation actually with a really good young PGA Tour player, Nick Hardy, a couple weeks ago at Pebble, and I said to Nick, Nick, this is like legal cheating, man. This is, if you, like, he talked about how he needed to get better with his wedges. I said, elite players knowing the length of golf swing with a TrackMan at their disposal, or Flight Scope, or Force, whatever people are using, it is accelerating the curve of what took us years and years to figure out, 15 years ago. So if you want to be an elite wedge player, I truly believe that is kind of where I would start. If I'm a college coach, then I'm doing the same thing. But again, I kind of mentioned how I like to use it. I like to start with the player telling me where their numbers are. And so I say, give me the swing you want there. Now, I will override, and sometimes where I'll go, hey, that number seems a little close. We might need to stretch that out. Or, gosh, those numbers seem really wide apart. Why don't we bring those a little bit closer together? Or is there something in between? But I think ultimately having most people are 10 to 15 centimeters apart. So whatever that is, 4 to 6 inches ish.
Yeah.
Yep.
From 10 to 15 yard increments in their wedges. That tends to be what I have learned. But I mean, I have a handful of college kids who stop by on a weekly basis. They have the app on their phone. They come, they grab the watch. I mean, I'm having the good opportunity this week to go play golf. And yesterday, I haven't hit a wedge in 2 weeks because it's been so cold here. And I went and hit 30 wedges. Very proud to say that I was about 80% hitting my numbers. But like in 30 balls, I felt like I got, the confidence to say, okay, I'm going to be good with wedges when I go down to Florida here this week.
You're ready.
Awesome. Well, Marcus, you got anything else for Ben before we get out of here?
I think that was pretty much, we covered a lot of things, and I really like that the viewers get to see that the wedge systems are not only for elite players. Own 1, 2, or 3 length of backswings to control your carry distance, and you will become way better as a wedge player.
Well, and the only thing I would maybe even add to that is it all starts with what you believe. And so I have yet to run into someone who says, I want to change it with tempo. But I guess hypothetically, you could just look at hand speed if you wanted to do that. But I think that's one of the cool things you guys have done is you haven't come out and said, well, you should just do this. Or it literally meets you wherever you want to be. If you want to, have 2 swings and have them be really far apart or whatever. I think on top of that, you throw in some of the full swing stuff that I'm starting to own a little bit better. Even though I still use it, there was one interesting full swing story that I wanted to share with you guys. We had a player who had trouble, and I don't know, Marcus, you probably use it a lot more than I do in full swing, but we had one player who had this trouble of sucking the club in and getting the club really flat. And what we noticed, I thought this was interesting, is when he made his best swings, his swing length was actually shorter because his hands went just kind of, in a sense, straight up instead of going kind of in this roundabout fashion.
Yes.
And I thought that was really an interesting observation because his hand length, I think it's pretty universally thought of now that the greater the hand length that you have, the greater opportunity you have to speed it up.
Yeah.
The difference from him is his hand length was not coming from an increased arc. His hand length was coming from this like roundabout way of getting up to where he was going.
He was winding himself up there.
Correct. And man, I thought that was a really interesting observation for him, that we actually had to quote unquote shorten him. But his hand path, if you videoed him from face on, his hand path actually would go further from a face on view.
Yeah.
But his hand path length actually read shorter because he wasn't sucking it in, rolling it in flat, and doing all this other stuff. So, I think that, again, there's a lot of things you can take out of it, but having accurate data is a way to tell a story that a player can use to manage. And again, for that player, we needed to stick at 117 to 120 on his full swing. When he got to 124 to 1 plus, it meant he was rolling it in, getting flat, bad things were happening. So that's the other thing that I think is really cool is you don't need, this isn't like, hey, just hit this number and you're a great player. It's, no, what do you do when you hit it well?
Exactly.
Let's always make sure we get back to that.
Exactly. And that's an interesting story. And like we say with deWiz all the time, it's not for the perfect golf swing. It's for your perfect golf swing. Know your numbers and know
Exactly.
your game.
That's why you got to know your numbers and know what works best for you and how you can replicate that same swing over and over. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time out to join us on our coaches webinar series. Tell the people real quick how they can learn more about you. Plug your Twitter and Instagram here for the people.
Well, thanks. Yeah, at Pelli Golf, PelliGolf is where you can find me. My website's the same thing, pelligolf.com. And we just recently, last year, launched an app as well, which is just kind of it's got over 250 video library. If you like the YouTube rabbit trail, which probably a lot of these viewers do, check that out. I think there's a lot of useful stuff in there. We dive into a lot of these things. If you struggle with something that we've talked about, I think there's a video in there that could help you down. And then I always love to see people in person. So if you're down in the Nashville area, we'd love to see you here at West Haven. And my cell phone's everywhere as well. So if you ever want to talk golf, feel free to give me a call. I always love talking golf and trying to help people get better.
Awesome. Well, we greatly appreciate you coming on and appreciate all the support you've given us over these last couple months. And good luck in your Florida trip.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everybody.